Hello and welcome back. In this video, we're going to learn how to install Docker inside of a Docker container. That's crazy, don't you think? Well, let's explain this a little bit more in detail. If we do Docker PS, well, now I don't have anything running, so let's go and start our services using Docker Compose start, and that's going to start all of our containers. You probably know that the Git server actually needs a lot of resources, so I'm just gonna stop it because we're not gonna be using it for now. So let's say docker stop Git server, and we're gonna stop it. So now we want to install Docker inside of the Jenkins container. So if we go inside of the Jenkins container, as we already know, and we type docker ps, we have nothing in here. But you may be wondering, why do we need to install Docker inside of this Docker container? Well, and it's super simple because, as I told you in the introduction, we're going to build Docker images using Jenkins. So it's going to save us a lot of time if we can type Docker commands in here like docker build or docker compose, all of this stuff. So that's why we're going to install Docker inside of this Docker container. This is a normal practice, don't worry. Most of the times you are going to find this in real environments, and even if you read the Jenkins documentation, you're going to find out that they actually use Docker inside of Docker. So let's learn how to do this. Well, the first thing that we need to do is, of course, create a Docker file to install Docker. Okay, as you remember, we had a folder which was the pipeline folder. I renamed that folder to pipelines Jenkins file, and in here we have all of this stuff that we learned in the previous section. So now I'm just gonna go ahead and create a new pipeline directory, and in here I'm gonna create a new Docker file inside of this pipeline. So let's go ahead and create a Docker file in here, and I will leave you this file, which is the Docker file that we're going to be using. If you remember, we already did this in the Ansible section, and this code actually installs pip and then Ansible. So we already knew this, so we're gonna keep it because remember that we need Ansible to run some things. And below this, we're going to start installing Docker. Remember that the Jenkins image is actually based on Debian. How do you know that? Well, you can always go to your terminal. Let me go out of here. Let's go inside of the Jenkins container, and you can check it by doing something like lsb release. Well, we don't have that command in here, but if you type cat etc os release, you can see that this is actually Debian. So that's why we're using Debian commands in here. So you can just go ahead and read the Docker documentation, and you're going to find out the way to install Docker in Debian, and this is exactly the way. So we're actually installing some packages in here. We're adding the Docker repository in here, and finally we update the repositories and we install Docker CE. If you don't know how to do this, you can always go to google.com and start looking for it. So let's search for Docker on Debian, and we're going to take a look at how this is installed. And if you start scrolling down, you are going to see all of the lines that I have in here. These install certificates, curl, all of that is in here, all of that repository stuff, everything. I actually took everything from here, so you have all of the information that you want in here. Cool. So now that we have this Docker file, in here we install Docker, then here we install Docker Compose. You already know how to install Docker Compose. And if you remember, we need to add the Jenkins user to the Docker group for the Jenkins user to be able to execute Docker commands. And as you can see here, we start using the user root to install all of these dependencies. And finally, when we are done with everything, we actually switch to the user Jenkins again to leave things as they were before. So let's go ahead and copy this entire Docker file. We're gonna go to our terminal. Let's get out of here. Remember that now we are in the pipeline folder, and in here we're going to create the Docker file with this content. So let's paste all of this, let's save this, and now we're going to do some changes to the Docker Compose file. So let's go back, and in here, we're going to take a look at our Docker Compose file. We're gonna go inside of this file and we're going to do a couple of modifications. Well, the first thing is that we're gonna build a new image, so that's gonna be called Docker. You can call it as you want. I'm just calling it Jenkins/Docker, but the name doesn't matter. And we're going to change the context. Where is the new context? Well, if you remember, let me go out of here, and if we go to the pipeline folder, we have our newly Docker file created there. So this is the context. This directory is going to be used as a context. So let's copy that directory. Let's go to our Docker Compose file, and we're going to modify the context in here. So let's paste that right here, and that's super cool. So we're telling Docker, hey Docker, please build a new image using this context, and under this directory you're going to find the Docker file. Okay, cool. So now we need to do one more thing, and that is adding the Docker sock. What is exactly the Docker sock? Well, if we save this and we go to ls var run docker.sock, you're gonna find there one file. And this sock file is nothing else but a sock that is launched by Docker, and from here Docker handles everything. So we need to have this sock inside of the Jenkins container. So we're just gonna copy the full path of this, which is var run docker.sock, and we're going to go to our Jenkins definition inside of the Docker Compose file, and we're going to map that volume to the container. So let's go and say, okay, I want the var run docker sock, which is the one that lives outside of the container, and I want to map this inside of the container in the same location. So in that way, whenever we type docker command inside of the Jenkins container, this sock is going to answer, and therefore Docker is going to know which services and which containers to use. So let's go ahead and save this, and we are almost done. So let's save this again, and now what do you think that we need to do to build this image? Well, that's super simple. We need to do a Docker Compose build. Remember that in order to build, you need to be at the same level of your Docker Compose file. So we're gonna do a Docker Compose build, and all of the instructions inside of our Docker file are going to be executed. So this may take a while, so let's wait until this finishes. Okay, the process already finished, and it took a while, like 5 minutes or more. So now that our image is built, we can do Docker images, and we can grep for Docker. And as you can see, this is the image that we actually built. Docker latest, and it was built 3 seconds ago. So now we need to recreate our Jenkins container to use this image. How do we do this? Well, we need to do docker compose app-d to recreate the container with the new image. As you can see, Jenkins has been recreated and Git server is starting. I don't want this, so I'm going to stop the Git server because I'm not going to use it, and this is actually a little bit heavy. And this is great. So now if we go inside of the Jenkins container, let's try to execute Docker commands there. So if we do docker ps, cool. We now have an error, but Docker, as you can see, is actually installed. So to fix this, we need to do something. And this is because the var run docker.sock. So we're going to copy this path. We're going to go outside of the container, and remember that if we go inside of the Jenkins container and we take a look at the Jenkins user ID, it's 1000. So this user needs to have permission to this file. So for that, we're going to exit out of the container, and we're going to do sudo change owner 1000 :1000 to the path of the Docker sock. Enter 1234 for the password, and as you can see, now the user Jenkins can read this file. So let's go inside again of the Jenkins container, and now let's try to do docker ps again, and as you can see, we can list all of the available containers. So if we do docker images, we now have all of the available images in our Docker host. And why is this, you may be wondering? And well, it's because we mapped this sock, which is in our host machine, and we're mapping it to the container. So the container is using this sock, and it's actually reading everything that we have in our machine. So this way we can actually start building images and doing a lot of stuff in here. I hope you've learned how to install Docker inside of that Docker container, I'll see you in the next lesson.